Hi there everyone, I'm the guy with no gamertag, and today I wanted to talk about whether I'll buy another Call of Duty game, and this is based on my experiences having returned to the series to play the most recent Modern Warfare. Now the reason I've titled it as such is firstly because of algorithms, but I also think it's a very good way to frame the discussion of my opinions and thoughts on Modern Warfare 2019. So the first thing I played on this game was the campaign, and quite frankly it is a good campaign. In terms of coherency, plausibility, as well as dare I say it some character development, this is easily the best Call of Duty campaign, perhaps since the original Modern Warfare. It's fairly grounded, it makes sense, it's plausible, and it was very enjoyable to play through. The initial missions were absolutely fantastic. When I first played them through, I was hooked on them. The way they were directed, the way they seamlessly transitioned from one mission to the next was absolutely fantastic, and I loved that part of the storytelling. And the first mission itself was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted from this game, where it's a bit gritty, it's grounded, and it requires a little bit of tactics and strategy as you're playing it. I really enjoyed it, whilst also having the normal Call of Duty spectacle. But there were a couple of points in the campaign which didn't quite float my boat. One of those was when you were attacking the airfield as a resistance fighter, and you're taking control of the explosive drones. Now, using them as the first assault made complete sense. You're just using the equipment you've got and you're sending these drones in to try and weaken the enemy's defences. However, I didn't like the fact that the game encouraged you to constantly take control of these whilst you were also pushing up on the front line. It didn't quite make sense, and it really just felt like a very cheesy mechanic of, oh, this combat's getting a bit hard, I'll just plop a drone on them and I can push through. I didn't find that particularly enjoyable. I would have preferred to either stay on the front line and perhaps call out where the drones could go, but not actually taking control of them myself, because I found that to be breaking the immersion of the mission for me personally. A slightly minor complaint I did also have was that in the long-range sniping mission, which by the way, the gameplay and the story of that mission were fantastic, the big problem I had with it is that I really don't like the sound effects of the HDR. It just doesn't feel like a satisfying rifle because of the sound effects of it and the animations. I'm not saying that they're bad, they just don't float my boat, and it feels more like I'm creating a dubstep beat than actually firing a bolt-action rifle. But overall, the campaign was really good. I really liked the inclusion of the very close quarters night vision building clearing missions. Those were fantastic, they were really well done. They also didn't overuse them, which was another good thing. And what's more, the campaign missions had quite a bit of tension, but unfortunately I feel the campaign didn't quite hit as hard as I was hoping it was going to. When content creators and media personnel were sent out to look at early builds of these missions, they were saying how brutal and how visceral they were and how they were really going to grip you and how tense they were. And I found the game just didn't quite do that for me. I didn't feel like it was as tense as they described it. Now, in the end of the day, that might have been these people perhaps being overexcited and perhaps overselling what it was. It was good and it was an enjoyable campaign, but I just felt like it didn't quite hit me hard enough. It felt like it pulled its punches a little, and maybe if it had committed a bit harder, it would have been phenomenal and I would have elevated it above just a Call of Duty campaign into one of the best stories I've played. But overall, it was a very good campaign and I did enjoy playing it. Another aspect of the game was the Spec Ops, and unfortunately this really fell flat. The large-scale Spec Ops missions were only really useful if you wanted to complete certain challenges and perhaps unlocking new operators you could use in multiplayer, but beyond that I just didn't find the gameplay enjoyable. I like that they did try something new, giving you massive open missions, you could do what you want, you could have so many different ways of approaching it, but it just didn't feel satisfying. It pales in comparison to the original two-player Spec Ops missions, and they just didn't have the focus or the gameplay overall that made me interested and invested in them. And similarly with the survival mode, which I realise PC and Xbox still haven't been able to play, that also fell flat. It just wasn't what it was in Modern Warfare 3. It didn't have the tension, it just didn't really do anything that floated my boat. And whilst there were some smaller scale missions which they labelled as classic, they still just didn't do it for me. It just never had the same feeling as when I go back and play Modern Warfare 2 or Modern Warfare 3 Spec Ops. For all their flaws, I feel that the older modes are still superior to the Spec Ops we've had in this game. And then finally, the meat and potatoes of this game is the multiplayer. And it was expansive in this game. As well as the 6v6 multiplayer, we also had the 3v3 gunfight mode, we had Ground War, which is a 64-player battles, then later on in the game we also got Warzone, and so it gave us players a lot to do. And they absolutely filled this thing to the brim with content. There were so many different weapons and so many different weapon modifications, you can customise your weapons to no end. However, the game heavily incentivises speed, which means that even though there's loads of attachments, you could do all sorts of crazy things with your weapons. If you're making your weapons slower, you're basically putting yourself at a disadvantage, which does kind of defeat the objective of having all this customization. Now, I will give credit that because they added in the larger game modes of Warzone as well as Ground War, they made longer range and heavy weapons way more viable, and it meant that there was still the reason to customize your weapons like that. So if we hadn't had those modes that were larger and had much larger maps, the weapon customization would have been very bland despite the sheer number of attachments in this game. And unfortunately, the main criticism I have of multiplayer is that I really think it needed to be slowed down a bit. Now, I realise that that is completely against what most Call of Duty players want. Most players will complain that, oh, it's campy, players are camping, people are mounting all the time, which partly is actually due to the challenges, but I think the actual game movement, as well as the attachment system, really just incentivises a stupidly aggressive playstyle, which I don't find fun to play as or play against. And I'm going to also highlight how this has caused some problems with some of the animations in the game. Now, for those of you who watched my Warzone review video, you'll know that I despise some of the movement mechanics in this game. Jump shotting, drop shotting, and the implementation of sliding in this game I think are terrible. Jump shotting, drop shotting have always been a cheesy way to secure a kill. It doesn't matter whether or not you would have won that fight, you do it just to make sure the other person can't quite get the shots on you. And it's frustrating to play against. It's a very cheesy mechanic, and I think they have no place in first-person shooters, especially one like this, which was marketed as being a much more grounded, military-like shooter. And then finally, the sliding mechanic, as I've said, it just gains you way too much momentum. You can slide too far. You gain speed by sliding on your knees on the floor. It doesn't make sense. It's not fun to play against because people can slide under your crosshairs, can slide past you and shoot you in the back. It doesn't make any sense. And it's just not fun to play against, and I do not like the implementation of this mechanic in this game. And now, as you're seeing in the clip in the background, it's led to this horrible scenario and horrible animation for me to try and track. I spot this enemy running out of this building, I take a few shots, but they slide behind the wall. Now that's fair enough, they have used the sliding mechanic as it was intended, as a method for players to get into cover and just get themselves into safety. However, they then peek over the corner, go prone, instantly vault over the object and shoot me in a few frames. I cannot physically react to that. There is no way you can anticipate a hitbox doing that, or a player model looking the way that it did. Those movements were erratic. They weren't even humanly possible to do it in that speed. It was ridiculous and infuriating to play against. And this is the problem I have. The movement and the abilities in game allow players to speed up their characters so much it's just no longer fun to play. It's a mindless, running around, sprinting at Mach 5 game, rather than being a potentially interesting and somewhat strategic multiplayer tactical shooter, which is what I would personally prefer to see. And the reason I say the game's gotten too fast is because the games that people hold in highest regard in this series, the original Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2. If you go back and play those now, you will realise how much slower your character moves in those games. And yet people still love them. You don't need this stupidly Mach 5 fast movement speed to actually make the game fun. And so with the addition of the various mechanics in this game, and the amount that players can speed up their characters' movement and animations because of the weapon modifications, really has ruined some of the experience for me. The thing I loved in the beta was that you could be a bit strategic and tactical, and whilst you still can at times in multiplayer, it feels like it just heavily incentivizes and unnecessarily rewards the players who just sprint around the map at Mach 5, leaving some players almost unable to track their movement. And that's the thing I've disliked the most in multiplayer. Now that being said, the sheer amount of modes available in this game and different ways you can play it in them has meant that I have found the experience that I've been looking for. In the gunfight mode specifically, that leans very heavily towards what I was hoping this game would be. Slightly more tactical, a little bit slower paced, requiring some thought as to how you're going to approach the situation, as well as having good gun skill and movement. The gunfight mode was absolutely fantastic. I used to really enjoy the face-off mode from Modern Warfare 3 because it was a little bit tense and you could see who was the best team of 3, but in gunfight it took it to a new level and I really enjoyed it. Now there were a couple of problems with this mode. One of the main ones is people quitting out of it. If your team is down a number of rounds without having scored one, quite often your teammates will quit out and you'll be left alone against the other team, which is not fun for either team to play. Also, I did have one encounter where on the mode where the weapons spawn around you and you have to go and pick them up, I had a situation where my teammate had left the game and no weapons spawned on my side of the map. So that was just salt rubbed into the wounds. But overall, this mode was a really great addition to the game and was really fun, and I really would love to see it return in the future. The normal 6v6 multiplayer, I found that I only really stuck with 2 modes, those being Headquarters and occasionally some Demolition when that was added to the game. And the reason for this was that I found that those were the only modes that really allowed me to try and think about how I was going to play. Team Deathmatch can either be a very slow-paced game mode or an insanely quick-paced game mode, and the inconsistency is why I don't often play it. I tried playing Domination, but I found that it was just a case of one team would constantly spawn trap the other, and that's not a gameplay experience I enjoy either. Whereas Headquarters, it continually moves the objectives around the map, and I really enjoyed the balance of attacking, king of the hill dynamics, improvised defense, as well as reclaiming enemy territory. Those mechanics worked really well and I really enjoyed it. It definitely could be a very sweaty mode at times, but I did enjoy the gameplay of it because it did allow me to perhaps try and outthink my enemies rather than just running in like a headless chicken. The Ground War mode was also an interesting addition. It added really large scale maps for the first time in a Call of Duty game, as well as vehicles to allow you to get around them. I did have some fun playing this. It was definitely a nice change of pace, but it wasn't something I found myself wanting to play consistently. Then the final mode added to the game was Call of Duty Warzone. The large scale battle royale featured on the Verdansk map, and it was really well received by the community. As I've said previously, I did enjoy it when I first started playing this. I liked some of the fresh ideas of giving players a weapon as well as some armor when they spawn in, as well as the currency mechanics and the addition of the Gulag, which has become a beautiful meme in its own right. And the sheer scale of this mode meant that there were so many creative plays players could make. There have been so many epic clips that even average players have made because this game just allows it. And that was one of the things that I feel like Ground War didn't quite have. Ground War was still a little bit too small to really encourage players to just go nuts and try whatever they wanted. Whereas Warzone had so many different features, so many different locations, and so many different spaces that it just gave players the freedom to pretty much do whatever they want, as well as trying to win the overall Battle Royale. And I enjoyed that when it first came out. But over time, when players started to optimize it and started to work out their best strategies, I found it less enjoyable. I often found myself dying in situations where I just could not anticipate the enemy player's actions, and so it felt a little bit frustrating, an unfortunate byproduct of the sheer quantity of things that players can do in this mode. So I ultimately stopped playing the game mode after about a month after its release. I will probably be returning to it fairly soon, but I don't think it's going to be something I play constantly. It was a good mode, it's really united the community in a way that I don't think anyone anticipated, and so it has been very good for the game, it just wasn't quite to my tastes. The last thing that I did find in multiplayer, and I'll admit I only found this about a month ago, was the trials they added. These are individual challenges which players can optionally choose to do, which you can get 1, 2 or 3 stars in, and if you get 3 stars in all of them you get better rewards. And that was something I hadn't realised because the game didn't really indicate what it was. It was always there on the multiplayer menu, but it was nothing I ever actually looked at and realised what it was until the Games of Summer came into the game, where they added new weapon variants and some other cosmetic items that players could unlock by completing all these trials and getting 3 stars. Now these challenges were actually really fun, they were satisfying to complete. Yeah, it was frustrating sometimes trying to get over the parkour mechanic because the movement in this game sometimes makes no sense, but overall these challenges were really fun, and these were giving me the same satisfaction as Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 Spec Ops. If the Spec Ops in this game had been more like the trials, I would have found that mode so much more interesting. And it proves that the game mode doesn't have to necessarily fit with the theme of the game, it just has to be fun. And these trials were, and I did enjoy doing them. I spent way too much time getting the 3 stars on Days of Summer, but it was fun and it was the right kind of satisfying challenge in the game. But the final criticism I will make of the game is that some of the challenge design is not fun and it is not enjoyable. The missions that they added to the game to unlock new weapon variants was an interesting addition. I quite enjoyed the tiered progression of those challenges, but at the end of the day, limiting players to only completing one challenge at a time and only working towards one mission at a time is always limiting, and it does lead to some frustration. But the issue I have is that some of the camo challenges really spoil the overall multiplayer gameplay, and the main one of those is the Mounted Kills challenge. This is a challenge which makes players play in a way that is not fun for the player doing it, and it's not fun for anyone else that player is playing with. And it's a shame because mounting was an interesting mechanic they added to this game, where you can just mount your weapon on a horizontal or vertical surface to reduce your recoil, and it makes so much sense in the context of this game. I will admit it does make the bipod attachment almost useless because the only benefit it provides is if you want to be mounted whilst prone. But requiring players to get 50 or 100 mounted kills if they want to unlock all of the weapon camouflages in the game really spoils the overall gameplay. And I think it's at odds with the original design of the mounting mechanic, because it's not something that players were ever supposed to rely on. It's something that players could think about and optionally use in certain situations. If your weapon was not kitted for accuracy and you were trying to engage someone at medium range, you quickly mount on a surface and you have more accurate fire to try and win you that fight. That's an interesting bit of thought that goes into the game. But unfortunately, this challenge means that all players do when they're going for it is they just mount constantly. It's not fun for them and it's not fun for the person they kill. And it just leads to a really backwards dynamic of gameplay, because whilst I criticise the game for being too fast, there is a balance between getting too fast and also players being stationary to complete a camo challenge. And quite frankly, I think the challenges need reworking, because I think mounting should come back in future games, but I just don't think that it should be incentivized as heavily as by adding a camouflage attachment requiring so many mounted kills to complete it, because that has overall spoilt some of the multiplayer experience. But to round the discussion off, Modern Warfare has been absolutely worth the money I paid for it. I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of the game, it has provided the usual Call of Duty frustration, but overall it's been a high quality product. The campaign was really good, one of the best there has been in a number of years. The multiplayer had some new interesting mechanics and some really interesting modes that really changed up the gameplay and allowed players to experience very different styles of play. The Spec Ops co-op mode really didn't float my boat, and I think the general consensus is that it just wasn't fun to play. But overall, this game has been fun. For me, the movement has always been the main problem with the game, but I don't see that changing. Unfortunately for me, my opinions completely diverge from what the Call of Duty player base generally wants. They want fast-paced action, really powerful kill streaks, and kind of a place to unwind. And whilst I agree with the unwinding, I also prefer having a little bit of ability to think out my situations and try and plan out what I'm going to do. I'm not asking for Rainbow Six Siege levels of tactical gameplay, but I want the opportunity to be able to outthink my enemy sometimes, rather than just having to run round constantly, so I can abuse the movement mechanics and occasionally cheese people when there's latency problems between two players. But whilst that did frustrate me, it's not enough for me to say that I will never purchase a Call of Duty game again. When I think about what this game has done, what it's changed about the series, what it's tried to do, I like the idea of a sequel to it. I'm interested to see what they might do with the story, what they can do with more campaign missions. I want to see how they develop it further. So if there was to be a sequel to this game, I would definitely consider picking it up. I don't think the series is ever going to be my main game like it used to be, but it's something that I may play and I may buy on occasion, because this game, if anything, has shown that they are willing to try something different and try something a little bit new, even if it takes 10 to 15 years to do so. But anyway, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Please feel free to continue the discussion down in the comment section down below. Keep it respectful, don't be a douche. I've been the guy with no gamer tag, and I'll see you on another video.
Nos ça a tourné, mais moi c'était à droite. Ah ouais, mais c'est pas tout faire. Putain, c'était une game de merde que j'ai joué.